Usually when we think about gravity, we picture something absolute, unbending, like a literal law of physics.
Right, yeah. You drop an apple, it falls.
Exactly. It's clean, it's predictable, it's mathematically perfect.
Mhm.
I mean, we like the forces that govern our lives to be visible and measurable.
Oh, for sure. It's comforting. I mean, physical gravity makes sense, right? It organizes the universe so we don't just randomly float off into the void.
But the moment you step into, say, a crowded office or board meeting or even just a dinner party, you immediately feel this entirely different kind of pull, like a social gravity.
Yeah, that's a great way to put it.
It's totally invisible,
Mm-hmm.
but it is just as relentless. I mean, it pulls certain people to the center of the room, it repels others, it crushes the naive, and it elevates the highly strategic. And you, listening to this right now, are floating in it. We all are, whether we actually want to acknowledge it or not.
And C, that refusal to acknowledge it is usually where people get into serious trouble, because we prefer to believe that the world operates purely on, like, merit or fairness or just good intentions. But power, at its core, is a fundamentally neutral force.
Right. It's not a moral thing.
Exactly. It isn't inherently good, and it isn't inherently evil. It is simply a dynamic that emerges the exact second two human beings interact.
Which is why you can't really protect yourself from a force you pretend doesn't exist. I mean, if you're walking around ignoring this social gravity, you're just going to get crushed by it. So today, we're handing you a shortcut to understanding these hidden mechanics of human influence.
And we have some incredible source material for this.
Yeah, we really do. We spent a lot of time tearing apart the psychology of power dynamics,
Yeah.
drawing really heavily from an incredibly thorough breakdown by the Bookwatch channel. They explored Robert Greene's seminal and, let's be honest, often super controversial text, The 48 Laws of Power.
It definitely rustles some feathers, that book.
Oh, big time. But we aren't here to give you like an instruction manual on how to become a corporate supervillain.
No, far from it. The objective of this deep dive is situational awareness. It's about understanding the psychological underpinnings of why people manipulate, how they set traps, and the profound emotional vulnerabilities that we all carry that make us susceptible in the first place.
You just need to know the rules of the game so you can shield yourself from those who absolutely do not have your best interests at heart.
Precisely. You have to learn how to see the matrix.
So let's jump right into the environment where this gravity is felt most acutely. The place where you probably spend the vast majority of your waking hours and where the stakes are directly tied to your livelihood, the workplace.
Ah, the hierarchy.
Yeah, the relationships with the people above you and the people right beside you.
It's the crucible. I mean, it's where we make the most dangerous assumptions, honestly. We operate on this script we were basically handed in childhood, which is work hard, show your brilliance, and you will be rewarded.
Exactly. I mean, every corporate training module, every cheesy motivational poster tells you to bring your absolute best self to work. Go above and beyond, be a superstar, right?
Right. But the very first concept we need to dissect completely shatters that illusion. The idea that it is a deadly mistake to outshine the master.
Oof. Yeah, that one hits hard.
It does. The premise is that doing what you can to put your boss's mind at ease is obviously required. But going too far, like showing off your brilliance, solving the impossible problem effortlessly, that
Yeah.
actually triggers their deepest insecurities.
To understand why this happens, though, I think we have to strip away the professional titles, right? Like,
Yeah.
look at the raw psychology of leadership and ego.
Oh, absolutely. Because people who ascend to the top of a hierarchy, whether it's, a tribal chief thousands of years ago or a modern regional manager at a tech firm, they undergo this really subtle psychological shift. Well, they begin to tie the success of the group directly to their own identity. They need to believe that they are in charge not because of luck or good timing or slimy office politics, but because they are fundamentally smarter, more sophisticated, and just more capable than everyone else in the room.
So they basically need that narrative just to sleep at night.
Yeah.
They assume they hold the position because of superior attributes.
Yes. So when you, the subordinate, come along and display significantly greater talent, you aren't just solving a company problem for them, you are actively shattering your boss's internal illusion of superiority.
Wow.
Yeah. The logical, rational part of your brain assumes, oh, hey, I fixed the broken spreadsheet the boss couldn't fix. My boss will be so grateful. But the boss's emotional brain feels something entirely different. They feel threatened.
Okay, I hear that, but I have to push back a little here. I mean, in a hyper-competitive modern economy, a boss's bonus is usually tied to the team's performance. If I make the team look good, the boss looks good. Are you really telling me they will intentionally sabotage their own department's performance just to protect their fragile ego?
In many cases, yes. Though, to be fair, rarely consciously.
Subconsciously, then.
Yeah. When human beings feel unsafe or inadequate, self-preservation completely overrides logic. They won't look in the mirror and say, I am firing this person because they are way smarter than me. They will rationalize it.
Oh, I've seen this.
Right. They will suddenly find that your quote-unquote communication style is abrasive, or you lack strategic vision, or you just aren't a culture fit.
The dreaded culture fit.
Exactly. They will secretly orchestrate a reason to replace you with someone who is less skilled, but crucially, less dangerous to their self-image.
So think about it like a massive stadium touring pop star, right? You get hired as a backup singer. Now, technically, you might possess a much better vocal range than the lead singer. You might have studied at some prestigious conservatory while the pop star was just like manufactured by a record label.
A very common scenario in that industry.
Right. But if you step up to the microphone during a live show and deliver this soaring, insane vocal run that completely blows the lead singer out of the water, making them look weak in front of 80,000 fans, you are not getting a record deal. You are getting fired before the tour bus even leaves the parking lot.
That is the perfect distillation of the dynamic. The audience isn't there for you. The show is about the star. The master demands to be the sun.
And you're just a planet.
Yes, you are meant to be a planet reflecting their light, not a brand new star competing for the gravitational center. If you must use your brilliant skills, you have to find a way to make it seem like your boss guided you to the solution. You attribute the inspiration to them.
Wow. Okay, so if we constantly have to massage the fragile egos of the people above us, it stands to reason that we want to surround ourselves with people we can actually trust, right? People who won't turn on us. Which brings us to this massive kind of counterintuitive paradox regarding the people beside us. The concept of friendship within the halls of power.
This one is brutal.
It really is. The advice here is basically to avoid laying too much trust in friends and instead learn how to use former enemies. I mean, my instinct when starting a new venture or building a team is immediately to call my buddies, the people who have my back. Why is that such a trap?
Because it fundamentally misunderstands the unwritten psychological contract of friendship. See, friendship is built on equality. It's this egalitarian dynamic where favors are exchanged casually and flaws are often overlooked or minimized just to keep the peace.
Right, you let things slide with friends.
Exactly. But when you introduce a formal hierarchy into that relationship, like when you suddenly become your friend's boss or you hold the key to their financial success, that contract is violently ruptured.
But wouldn't a friend be more honest with you? Like, do you know when you're messing up?
Actually, the total opposite is true. Friends hide their true feelings to avoid conflict. If your leadership strategy is failing, a friend is usually the absolute last person who will tell you the harsh truth because they don't want to damage the personal bond.
Oh, that makes sense.
Furthermore, hiring a friend disrupts the balance of the relationship. People possess a really deep psychological need to feel like they've earned their position in the world through merit. When you simply hand a job or a massive favor to a friend, it kind of robs them of that agency. It starts to feel like a burden.
Because now they owe you, big time.
Precisely. They feel indebted. And indebtedness is a profoundly uncomfortable emotional state for a human being. Over time, that discomfort actually mutates into resentment.
That's so dark.
It is. But it happens all the time. They start to feel that you view yourself as their savior. Their suppressed jealousy over your superior position just simmers below the surface. And because you trust them completely, you never see the betrayal coming until it boils over into this sudden, seemingly inexplicable burst of anger.
Man, you think you're throwing them a lifeline, but you're actually planting a time bomb in your own living room.
Now, contrast that psychological landscape with a former enemy, or even just a staunch rival.
Okay, let's hear it.
If you can somehow overcome your own personal pride and bring a former adversary into your fold, the dynamic is entirely different. An enemy has something to prove. They don't feel entitled to your favor. They know they are on thin ice.
They're hungry.
Very hungry. They crave your approval to validate their new position. Because of that insecurity and that drive to prove their worth, they will actually work significantly harder to demonstrate their loyalty than a comfortable friend ever would. You are trading the cozy, false security of a friend for the desperate, high-performance loyalty of someone trying to secure their own survival.
It flips literally everything we assume about team building totally upside down.
Yeah.
But, okay, if we can't rely on our friends and we have to constantly watch our backs with rivals, how do we actually secure our own position? Like,
Yeah.
how do we ensure we don't just get unceremoniously replaced the second a cheaper, younger rival comes along?
This requires moving beyond likability and focusing entirely on leverage, specifically the creation of ultimate dependency.
Dependency.
Yes, true independence in any structure doesn't come from isolating yourself or hoarding resources. It comes from weaving yourself into the fabric of the organization so tightly that your superiors literally cannot function without you.
The history on this is fascinating. Look at Otto von Bismarck. I mean, he was a master Prussian statesman in the 19th century, operating under Kings Frederick and William. Now, these kings were widely noted by historians as being quite weak, indecisive men, right?
Very much so.
So Bismarck didn't try to stage a coup. He didn't try to become the king himself, which would have put a massive target on his back. Instead, he made himself the sole conduit for all state power. He mastered the complexities of foreign policy that the kings just found overwhelming. He built the relationships with foreign diplomats himself.
He essentially became the operating system of the country.
Exactly. He made himself so utterly indispensable to the day-to-day functioning of the state that these kings basically just rubber-stamped whatever he said. They were terrified he would resign.
Bismarck understood that the person with the crown doesn't necessarily hold the power. The person who holds the key to the machine holds the power. I mean, so many people exhaust themselves trying to climb to the very top, fighting tooth and nail for the CEO title. But the individual with the most actual freedom is often the one who possesses a highly specialized skill or a dense knowledge base that no one else has the patience or intellect to master.
So think about this in your own career right now, If your job could be taught to a new hire in 2 weeks, you are a cog in the machine. You are infinitely replaceable. But if you are the only person who understands how the legacy software backend actually integrates with the new servers.
The classic IT guy scenario.
Right. Or if you hold the personal cell phone level relationship with the firm's 3 biggest clients, your boss is paralyzed by the thought of you leaving. You've engineered a situation where it is far more painful for them to fire you than it is to just tolerate your demands.
Yeah, and once you establish that dependency, you still have to navigate the day-to-day social interactions within those halls of power. You have to become what historians call the perfect courtier.
The perfect courtier. It sounds very Renaissance.
It is, but it applies today. It's an entire ecosystem of subtle behaviors, particularly when it comes to asking for favors.
That's a huge point, because how do you ask for a massive favor from someone in power without looking weak or, like you said earlier, indebted?
Well, the absolute worst thing you can do, which ties back to our discussion on friendship, is to remind them of your past loyalty, like saying, hey, remember when I worked over the weekend for you last year? I really need this promotion.
Oh man, I've heard people do that 100 times. It always feels so awkward in the room.
It feels awkward because you are reminding them of a debt. People despise feeling like they owe someone else. It impinges on their sense of freedom. If you appeal to their gratitude, you will likely be met with coldness or a sudden convenient loss of memory.
I don't recall you working that weekend, right?
Exactly. Instead, the perfect courtier appeals exclusively to self-interest. You have to step outside your own needs, put yourself entirely in their shoes, and figure out what actually motivates them. What external threat are they facing? What legacy are they trying to build? You frame your request entirely as a vehicle for them to get what they want.
So instead of saying, I deserve to lead this new project because I've been here 5 years, you say, if you put me in charge of this project, I can leverage my existing vendor relationships to cut the overhead by 20%, which will guarantee your quarterly budget goals are met.
Brilliant.
You don't even mention yourself, really.
Exactly. You align your advancement directly with their survival and success. And part of surviving as a courtier means knowing how to navigate the legacy of the people who came before you. There's a profound danger in stepping into a role previously held by a legend.
Oh, the trap of the great predecessor. It seems like every ambitious person dreams of taking over for the beloved CEO who just retired or, the legendary coach who won 5 championships. They think they are inheriting a golden goose.
You are inheriting an impossible baseline. When you step into the shoes of a highly successful, beloved predecessor, simply maintaining the status quo makes you look like a massive disappointment. You're constantly being measured against a ghost.
And you can't beat a ghost.
The ghost always wins. Because human nostalgia selectively edits out all the mistakes the predecessor made, remembering only their absolute triumphs. If you follow their exact playbook, you will just be viewed as a pale imitation.
So it's the play. You get Offered the top job after a legend steps down, do you just turn it down?
No, you take the job, but you conceptually kill the predecessor.
Conceptually.
Yes, conceptually. You cannot walk their path. You must immediately carve out an entirely new niche, drastically change the direction, and establish a completely different metric for success. If they were known for conservative, slow growth, you make a splash with aggressive, highly visible acquisitions.
You change the rules of the game.
You have to force the audience, the board, the fans, the market to judge you on a totally different scale. You don't compete with the ghost, you exercise it by changing the game entirely.
Okay, so we've thoroughly mapped the inner circle. We know how to manage the boss's ego, why friends are a liability, how to build dependency, and how to navigate the ghosts of the past. But dealing with the people immediately around you is only like the inner ring of the target.
Right, there's a much wider audience.
To truly project power, you have to control how the broader world competitors, acquaintances, the public perceives you. We have to move from the tactical execution of relationships to the theatrical projection of an aura.
This is the shift from the mechanical to the psychological facade, how you construct the image of who you actually are.
Let's start with the most basic building block of that facade, what comes out of your mouth. The power of the smoke screen and the weaponization of silence. The concept here is to constantly hide your true intentions behind a friendly, bland exterior, and fundamentally, to always say less than necessary. Why is silence, just simply not talking, so incredibly terrifying to the average person?
It traces back to a really fundamental human discomfort with the unknown. We possess a deep psychological drive to make sense of our environment. Silence creates an absolute void of information, and human beings are socially programmed to try and fill that void.
We hate awkward pauses.
We despise them. When you offer short, vague answers, or when you simply hold eye contact and remain completely silent during a negotiation, the other person's nervous system goes on high alert.
They assume you know something they don't, like you're holding a royal flush.
Exactly. Their defenses scramble. To alleviate the intense awkwardness of the silence, they start talking. They overcompensate. They try to explain themselves, trying to elicit any kind of reaction from you just to prove that the social connection is still intact.
And then they spill everything.
Yes. In that desperate rush to fill the air, they inevitably reveal their own true intentions, their anxieties, their bottom line in the negotiation, and their hidden weaknesses.
They just open up their playbook and hand you all their cards because they literally can't stand 10 seconds of quiet. I'm thinking about every salary negotiation I've ever heard of. The recruiter throws out a low number. The candidate just stares at them, silent. And the recruiter panics and immediately starts bidding against themselves, raising the offer before the candidate even speaks.
It's highly effective. And the secondary benefit is that by speaking less, the words you do choose to utter take on a monumental weight. Scarcity applies to language, too. When a person who rarely speaks finally says something, people lean in. They dissect the short sentences, projecting deep, profound meaning onto them. It makes you appear mysteriously powerful.
Look at Andy Warhol. I mean, he was an absolute master of this. Warhol realized that if he explained his art, he limited it to just one meaning. So he would do these press interviews where the interviewer would ask these incredibly dense philosophical questions about consumerism and society.
And he would say almost nothing.
Nothing. Warhol would just stare blankly and say, yes, or he would intentionally say something completely vacuous on what happened. The art critics would tie themselves in intellectual knots, writing 10-page essays, trying to decode the brilliant subversive irony of his one-word answers. He let them do the heavy lifting of building his genius.
Marcel Duchamp operated on the exact same principle. He understood that the less he explained his ready-made art pieces, the more the public argued about them, the more the press covered the outrage, and consequently, the more valuable the work became.
So smart.
The smokescreen isn't about being invisible and hiding in a corner. It's about being highly visible, but completely, utterly unreadable.
It's the exact same psychology as a magician's misdirection. I think people misunderstand misdirection. They think it's flashy, like a puff of smoke, a loud bang, a sequined assistant. But the most devastating misdirection in close-up magic is actually incredibly boring.
Boring? How so?
It's a smokescreen made up of normal, everyday gestures. A magician drops his hand to his side in a completely relaxed, natural way. Because the movement is so friendly and normal, the audience's brain categorizes it as safe and literally stops paying attention to it. We can only actively focus our cognitive energy on one anomaly at a time.
I see.
If you present a friendly, bland, neutral face, your target feels calm, Their guard drops and they walk right into whatever strategic trap you have set, completely oblivious because you never gave them a reason to raise their shields.
That cultivated neutrality, combined with silence, slowly builds the foundation of your reputation. And reputation is the single most valuable asset you possess in the realm of power. You must guard it with your life.
The historical example that really drives this home is General Erwin Rommel during World War II. Rommel, the Desert Fox, had cultivated this reputation for sheer tactical brilliance, speed, and almost supernatural intelligence on the battlefield.
His reputation preceded him everywhere.
Literally everywhere. His reputation became so vast and so intimidating that British troops in North Africa would literally abandon their positions and flee just upon hearing rumors that Rommel was approaching the sector. Before a single tank rolled over the dune, before a single shot was fired, Rommel had won the battle. His reputation did the fighting for him.
That is the ultimate leverage. If your reputation precedes you, you win conflicts before the opening bell even rings. Your enemies are fighting a myth, and you cannot defeat a myth. But to forge a reputation of that magnitude, you first must secure the raw material of power, which is attention. You cannot fade into the background. You must court attention at all costs.
At all costs, even if it's negative attention. I feel like in the age of cancellation, bad attention is just a career death sentence.
It requires nuance, certainly, especially today. But historically and psychologically, the principle holds true. P.T. Barnum, the legendary showman, is the archetype here. Barnum actively welcomed critics. He would anonymously write scathing letters to the editor attacking his own shows.
Wait, he attacked himself?
Yes. He intentionally blurred the lines between genuine wonder and obvious hoax, making himself look like a controversial conman. Why? Because he understood that human beings are drawn to larger-than-life figures, and that public outrage is a far more powerful magnet than polite approval. Being attacked generates intrigue. Being ignored is the only true death.
Okay, so you generate the spectacle, you court the attention, you build the massive reputation. But how does that square with the principle of scarcity? There's a rule in the book that dictates you must use absence to increase respect. If you are constantly throwing parades and writing op-eds to get attention, aren't you going to overexpose yourself or just burn people out?
That is the delicate tightrope walk of the facade. You generate massive attention to construct the reputation, but the exact moment that reputation is solidified, you must aggressively control the supply of your presence.
Supply and demand.
Exactly. Think of the economics of the art market. Joseph Duveen, one of the most successful art dealers in history, would buy up entire collections of a specific artist's work, but he wouldn't flood the market with them. He would lock them in a dark vault in his basement.
Artificial scarcity.
Precisely. By artificially restricting the supply, the price of the one or two paintings he did allow to hit the market absolutely skyrocketed.
Or look at authors like J.D. Salinger. He wrote The Catcher in the Rye, became this massive literary sensation, and then completely vanished from public life. He retreated to a compound in New Hampshire and refused to speak to the press. And his myth only grew. People became obsessed with him because they couldn't have him.
Exactly. For you, the listener, ask yourself how this applies to your daily life. Are you too available in your romantic relationships, in your group chats, or at your job? Are you fading into the background scenery of people's lives simply because you are always there?
Like responding to Slack messages instantly.
Yes. If you are the person who immediately responds to every email within 30 seconds, even at 11 p.m. on a Sunday, your presence loses all value. You train people to expect your labor as a given. Sometimes the most powerful, status-elevating move you can make is to simply leave the room.
Be unavailable. Let the phone ring. When you step away, people are forced to wonder what you're doing. They talk about you. If you've built a strong foundation, your physical absence actually amplifies your psychological presence in their minds.
Which brings us to the final layer of the facade, the illusion of effortlessness.
This might be my favorite concept. The idea that you must never show the sweat, the late nights, or the sheer grinding effort it takes to achieve your success. You have to make your accomplishments look like magic. And part of that magic is knowing when to play dumb.
The psychology of playing dumb is a brilliant counterintuitive strategy. We naturally want to show everyone how smart we are, but displaying your intellect constantly just puts others on the defensive.
The story of Bismarck playing cards is the perfect illustration of this. So Bismarck is back, and he needs an Austrian diplomat, Count Blum, to sign a highly complex treaty. This treaty is incredibly advantageous for Germany, but it is fundamentally a bad deal for Austria. Blum is cautious. He's scrutinizing the document. So the night before the final negotiation, Bismarck invites the Count to his quarters to play a popular card game called Quins.
And what does Bismarck do?
During the game, Bismarck intentionally plays like a reckless idiot. He makes impulsive bets, he miscalculates, he blunders repeatedly, and he loses a significant amount of money to Bloom.
And consider the cognitive shift in Count Bloom's mind during all this.
Right. Bloom sits there raking in the chips thinking this legendary statesman is a complete fraud, he's impulsive, he lacks strategic foresight, he's a fool. Bloom's ego swells massively. So the next morning when they sit down to finalize the treaty, Bloom barely reads the fine print. He signs it blindly because his ego has convinced him that Bismarck couldn't possibly be smart enough to lay a trap.
Bismarck weaponized his opponent's ego. He sacrificed his own pride in a meaningless card game to secure the future of his entire nation. We see this principle in design and art as well. Look at the architect Jules Mansart in 17th century France.
Oh, the gardens?
Yes, he was commissioned to design these sprawling, magnificent gardens for King Louis XIV. Mansart was a genius, but he knew the king's ego was incredibly fragile. So Mansart would intentionally draft blueprints with obvious glaring flaws, like a poorly placed fountain or an asymmetrical hedgerow. He would present these flawed plans to the king,
basically giving the king the opportunity to fix it.
Precisely. The king would eagerly point out the mistake. Mansart would immediately act astonished, strike his forehead, and lavish praise on the king's brilliant, unmatched architectural eye. Mansart willingly surrendered the credit for the garden's perfection in order to secure his permanent, lucrative position in the royal court. He managed his master's ego flawlessly.
To pull off these kinds of illusions, you have to be in absolute control of your own persona. You can't just be yourself. You have to recreate yourself. Abraham Lincoln is a prime example of this. The historical image we have of Lincoln, the humble, simple, axe-swinging country lawyer with the rough flannel shirt and the folksy anecdotes, that wasn't an accident.
It was highly calculated.
It was a meticulously crafted political persona. He was a brilliant, highly calculating politician. He orchestrated his public image, utilizing the relatively new technology of photography to present a specific, relatable narrative that resonated with the exact demographic he needed to win the presidency. He was, in many ways, a master actor.
And the final touch to this performance is hiding the mechanism. During the Renaissance, artists would go to extraordinary lengths to hide the chaotic, sweaty, exhausting work of their studios. They kept the public locked out until the final masterpiece was unveiled. If people see how hard you work or the mundane tricks you use to get things done, the magic evaporates.
Think about the duck syndrome at elite universities. You see these students gliding effortlessly across the campus, getting straight A's, running 3 clubs, looking perfectly put together. They look like swans gliding on glass. But underwater, out of sight, they are paddling furiously, sleep-deprived, and totally stressed out.
But they project effortlessness.
Exactly. If people know exactly how you achieve your results, they feel they could replicate it. The mystery is gone. Or worse, if they see your intense, clawing ambition and the sweat on your brow, they feel threatened by your drive. By making it look easy, you transcend normal human effort. You appear almost divine.
So we have the facade, the reputation is built, the silence is weaponized, the illusion is flawless. But a facade can only take you so far. Eventually, the social gravity forces a collision. You will enter a dispute, a negotiation, a battle for resources.
Which moves us from the realm of perception into the theater of conflict. This is where the strategy becomes, kinetic. How do you act when you are under fire? Let's dissect the art of the trap, starting with what the source material calls the vulture strategy.
The vulture strategy.
Yeah, the premise is to use the hard work, the intelligence, and the running around of others to further your own cause,
Right.
And ultimately to take the credit. The vulture sits patiently on the branch, watching the hyenas exhaust themselves hunting the prey, and then sweeps in to eat the feast. Now, I really struggle with this one. Is it truly a sustainable strategy to just sit in the shadows and steal people's hard work? In a modern corporate environment, wouldn't you just be exposed as a lazy fraud and fired?
It's a provocative, predatory image, the vulture, but we have to elevate the analogy from petty theft to strategic management. If you interpret this as literally plagiarizing your coworker's report, yes, obviously you will be fired. But look at it from a macro level.
Okay, macro level.
If you insist on personally executing every single task, doing all your own research, writing every line of code, designing every graphic, you will exhaust your energy and severely limit your scope. The vulture strategy, applied practically, is the essence of delegation and synthesis.
So it's about being the aggregator.
Yes. It means positioning yourself as the visionary who aggregates the value created by specialists. You pay researchers, you hire engineers, you leverage their specialized labor, and you assemble it into a cohesive whole. You reap the overarching credit for the final product because you directed the energy. It's about maintaining a position of holy speed and efficiency.
So it's less about stealing and more about avoiding the trap of micromanagement and busy work. You are the architect, not the bricklayer. But what happens when someone challenges your authority or your vision? The natural instinct is to defend yourself verbally, to argue your point. But the rule here is absolute. Win through your actions, never through argument.
Arguing is one of the most inefficient uses of power imaginable. Think about the physiological cost. When you argue, adrenaline spikes, voices raise, and egos lock in. Even if you completely dismantle your opponent's argument with flawless logic and verifiable facts, you have inflicted emotional damage.
They won't forgive you.
They might nod and agree with you to your face to end the conflict, but you haven't changed their mind. You've only bruised their pride. They will resent you, and they will wait for an opportunity to undermine you later.
I love the story of Christopher Wren regarding this point. Wren was a legendary English architect in the 17th century. The mayor of Westminster hired him to design and build a new town hall. The building goes up and the mayor walks in to inspect the ground floor. He looks up at the massive ceiling supporting the second floor and he gets absolutely terrified.
He thought it was going to fall.
Yes, he is convinced the engineering is faulty and the entire second floor is going to collapse on his head. He demands that Wren build 2 massive extra pillars in the center of the room to support the roof. Now, Wren is a master engineer. He has done the math. He knows, objectively, that the pillars are completely unnecessary.
Now, a lesser man, a man controlled by his ego, would have argued. He would have rolled out the blueprints, written out the complex load-bearing equations on a chalkboard, and tried to prove to the mayor that he was an ignorant fool.
But Wren didn't say a single word. He didn't argue. He simply smiled, nodded, and spent the time and money to build the 2 massive pillars right where the mayor wanted them.
So he just caved.
Well, the mayor walked in, saw the pillars, felt safe, and praised Wren's flexibility. It wasn't until years later, when workmen were up on scaffolding painting the ceiling, that they noticed the secret. Wren had intentionally left a half-inch gap between the top of the pillars and the ceiling. The pillars were holding up absolutely nothing.
That is fantastic.
They were freestanding sculptures of appeasement. Wren won through action. He neutralized the mayor's fear without compromising his own architectural integrity, and he didn't waste a single breath arguing.
He understood a profound truth about human psychology. Demonstrating a truth is infinitely more powerful and much less offensive than explaining a truth. People believe what they see, not what they are told.
Brilliant. Moving deeper into the tactical mechanics of conflict, we have to talk about mobility and unpredictability. We touched on how humans hate the unknown when we discussed silence. This applies kinetically, too. Humans are pattern-seeking animals. We find immense comfort in routines.
And strategically, routine is a massive vulnerability. When an opponent can map your habits, they can predict your reactions. And if they can predict your reactions, they can engineer a scenario that forces you right into a trap.
The ultimate example of weaponizing unpredictability is General Stonewall Jackson during the American Civil War. In the Shenandoah Valley campaign, Jackson was commanding a Confederate force that was massively outnumbered by General George McClellan's Union Army, which was slowly, methodically marching toward Richmond. If they met in a traditional pitched battle, Jackson would have been annihilated.
So he had to change the rules.
He completely abandoned traditional military doctrine. He didn't dig trenches. He didn't fortify a hill. He took his army and marched them north. Then he abruptly woke them up in the middle of the night and marched them south. He moved them in these bizarre, zigzagging, completely chaotic patterns that seemed to make absolutely no geographic or strategic sense.
Consider the cognitive load this placed on General McClellan. McClellan was a highly analytical, traditional commander. He expected a logical defense.
Exactly. McClellan looked at the scouting reports and his brain just short-circuited. He completely froze. He stopped the advance of his massive army because he was desperately trying to decode a master strategy that simply didn't exist. He assumed Jackson was setting some brilliant invisible trap. That paralysis, caused entirely by unpredictability, delayed the Union advance long enough for the South to reinforce Richmond.
Jackson harnessed the terror of the random. Think about natural disasters, a tornado, an earthquake. We are terrified of them, not just because they are destructive, but because we cannot schedule them. We can't negotiate with them.
They just happen.
Right. If you behave unpredictably in a corporate negotiation or a legal battle, your opponent is forced to abandon their offensive strategy and adopt a defensive, reactive posture. They are so consumed with bracing for your next random move that they cannot execute their own plan.
And a crucial component of that chaotic mobility is resisting the urge to hunker down. When people feel attacked, their natural instinct is to retreat, to close the office door, stop answering emails, stop talking to colleagues, and build a conceptual fortress around themselves. But the rule here is explicit. Isolation is dangerous.
Niccolo Machiavelli wrote extensively about this. He pointed out that throughout military history, fortresses almost always fail. We build them thinking they will protect us, but they actually turn us into a massive and mobile target. They trap us inside.
We become sitting ducks.
Exactly. More importantly, they cut off our supply lines. And in the social gravity of power, the most vital supply line is information. If you isolate yourself, you lose touch with the whispers, the shifting alliances, the early warning signs of an attack.
You go blind. And worse, when you are blind and isolated, your mind starts to cannibalize itself. You invent worst-case scenarios. You breed paranoia.
Precisely. To survive a crisis and maintain power, you must do the exact opposite of what your fear dictates. You must stay aggressively mobile. You must be hypersocial. Walk the floors, talk to everyone, attend the gatherings. The more deeply embedded you are in the social network, the harder it is for enemies to plot against you in secret without someone tipping you off.
Okay, let's explore how we actually launch an initiative when the time is right. This requires tactical boldness, singular focus, and anticipating the end game. Let's start with focus, the power of concentrating your forces.
Dispersed energy is weak energy. The historical accounts of Giacomo Casanova are illustrative here. He wasn't just a legendary seducer, he was a master of singular focus. When he was imprisoned in a notoriously inescapable Venetian dungeon, the Leads, his mind didn't fracture.
He didn't just give up.
He didn't despair, he didn't write poetry, he didn't plot revenge. He focused every ounce of his mental and physical energy on a single point, a hole in the floor. He scrounged a piece of iron, fashioned a makeshift pike, and dug for months. When the guards randomly moved him to another cell, seemingly ruining months of work, he didn't break. He simply started digging a new hole in the new cell until he eventually escaped. Absolute, singular intensity defeats casual, dispersed apathy every time.
And that focused intensity must be paired with audacious action. Hesitation is a tactical killer. If you are going to make a move, launch a product, ask for a massive raise, confront a rival, you must execute it with absolute unwavering certainty, even if you are secretly terrified. Timidity broadcasts weakness.
People can smell fear.
They really can. If you make a mistake through bold action, you can often correct it by doubling down with even more audacity. People are easily cowed by sheer confidence.
However, boldness without foresight is just recklessness. Which brings us to the crucial necessity of planning all the way to the end. This is where most ambitious people fail. They fall victim to what psychologists call the optimism bias or the hope bias.
The text brings up the Athenians during the Peloponnesian War for this. Athens was a brilliant, wealthy, powerful culture. But their leaders got greedy, and they got caught up in the emotional fervor of expansion. They decided to launch a massive naval armada to conquer the distant island of Sicily. They planned the launch, they built the ships, they imagined the gold they would bring back, but they never planned for how the war would actually end. They just blindly assumed their inherent greatness would guarantee victory.
They didn't calculate the logistics of a multi-front war. They didn't anticipate that the Sicilians, fighting for their homeland, would fight with a desperate ferocity the Athenians lacked. The campaign became a quagmire, the fleet was destroyed, and the catastrophic loss of wealth and manpower directly triggered the eventual collapse of the entire Athenian empire.
They fell in love with the beginning of the story and completely forgot to write the ending.
Exactly. Planning to the end means ruthlessly anticipating the worst-case scenarios, the unintended consequences, the jealousies your success will spark, and knowing the exact moment to stop and cash out your chips.
And as you plan your path, you have to control the paths of others. You have to get others to play with the cards you deal. The illusion of choice. Henry Kissinger was an absolute virtuoso at this when dealing with President Richard Nixon.
Oh, this is a classic example.
Kissinger knew that Nixon had a massive ego and fiercely guarded his authority. If Kissinger went into the Oval Office and just told Nixon what foreign policy to enact, Nixon would rebel just to prove who was boss.
So Kissinger engineered the options.
Exactly. Kissinger would present Nixon with a neatly typed memo outlining 3 or 4 possible courses of action. Option A would be overly aggressive, perhaps risking nuclear war. Option C would be incredibly weak, a total capitulation. But option B, the exact policy Kissinger wanted all along, would be framed as the perfect, logical, statesman-like middle ground.
And Nixon fell for it.
Every time. Nixon would look at the options, reject the extremes, and confidently select option B. Nixon felt the rush of power, believing he was making the executive decision, completely unaware that Kissinger had built a maze where every path led to Kissinger's desired destination.
This is a devastatingly effective tool for the listener. Think about your daily negotiations. When you ask a team, what should we do about this marketing campaign? You are inviting chaos and debate. You are surrendering control. But if you say, we have two viable paths, we can either launch the expensive, risky TV ad campaign, or we can double down on the targeted social media rollout, which stays under budget, you give them the psychological comfort of autonomy they get to choose. But you have restricted their universe of choices to options that you already control.
John D. Rockefeller did this with brutal financial force. When he was building Standard Oil, he wanted to buy out his competitors in Cleveland. But instead of just engaging in a bidding war, he went around them. He secretly bought up or negotiated exclusive, heavily discounted rates with the railroads that transported the oil. Then he walked into his competitors' offices and presented them with two choices.
Sell or die.
Basically. You can sell your refinery to me right now at this price, or you can refuse, and I will instantly double your shipping costs and bankrupt you within 6 months. They had a choice. But both choices resulted in Rockefeller winning.
The culmination of all this tactical maneuvering, the highest form of strategic defense, is assuming formlessness, having no rigid structure to attack.
The ultimate historical embodiment of this is T.E. Lawrence of Arabia during World War I. He was a British intelligence officer tasked with aiding the Arab revolt against the Ottoman Turks. Now, the Turkish army was a traditional European-style military force. They had heavy artillery, structured battalions, and they deeply wanted a set-piece battle. They wanted Lawrence to line up his forces on a battlefield so they could shoot at them.
Lawrence refused to give them a target. He understood the terrain, the vast, inhospitable desert, better than the Turks. He organized the Arab tribes into a completely fluid, formless insurgency. They were like a mist.
They just vanished.
They would materialize out of the dunes, strike a railway line or a supply depot with devastating speed, and before the Turks could even aim their cannons, the Arab fighters would dissolve back into the desert, vanishing completely.
The Turks exhausted their resources, their morale, and their sanity trying to find an enemy that refused to hold a shape. They were punching water.
Formlessness means relinquishing your attachment to a single system or a rigid ideology. The moment you declare, this is the only way we do things, you become predictable. And predictability, as we've established, is death in a conflict. You must adapt to the container you are poured into. When the market shifts, your strategy shifts instantly, leaving your rigid competitors swinging at thin air.
These kinetic strategies are incredibly powerful. We've covered how to hide, how to move, how to trap. But as we dig deeper into this source material, you realize that the most terrifying, profound level of control isn't physical or even tactical. It operates entirely on an emotional plane. We need to move into the final realm, psychological warfare.
This is where it gets really deep.
This is about manipulating the deep-seated emotional needs, the traumas, and the flaws that drive all human behavior.
This is the bedrock of social gravity. Because beneath the logic and the business plans, humans are entirely irrational, emotionally driven creatures.
Let's start with the danger of emotional contagion, and specifically the concept of the infector. The rule here is blunt. Avoid the unhappy and the unlucky. Now, at first glance, this sounds incredibly cruel. If a friend is going through a hard time, you're supposed to help them.
We must draw a strict psychological distinction here. We are not talking about someone who has experienced a sudden tragedy or a temporary run of bad luck or a medical issue. Compassion is essential there. We are talking about the chronic infector.
Right, the perpetual victim.
Yes.
Yes.
This is an archetype of person whose misery is not accidental, it is self-generated. They are chronically unhappy, perpetually embroiled in drama, constantly complaining, and forever playing the victim. Their unhappiness is a weapon they use to draw attention and resources.
And the danger is that emotions are highly contagious.
Extremely contagious. We are biologically wired to mirror the emotional states of those around us. If you allow an infector into your inner circle, their chaotic weight will drag you down. You will exhaust your own mental health trying to save someone who secretly does not want to be saved, because their victimhood is their core identity.
That's heavy.
Furthermore, your reputation is built by association. If you are constantly seen repairing the damage caused by an infector, the broader community will begin to view you as damaged by proxy. You have to ruthlessly identify these emotional vampires and cut them out of your professional and personal life. You must quarantine them and instead intentionally surround yourself with the cheerful, the successful, and the fortunate.
Identifying who you are dealing with is the single most important survival skill. The source material breaks down 5 specific risk groups, 5 types of dangerous people. If you cross them or try to manipulate them without realizing what they are, they will destroy you. Let's break these down thoroughly because you really need to memorize this list. Group 1. The overly sensitive and proud.
This individual suffers from a pathologically fragile ego. Their self-worth is paper-thin. Because of this, they perceive every interaction through a lens of potential disrespect.
Like they're always looking for a reason to be offended.
Exactly. Even an unintentional slight, forgetting to CC them on an email or glancing at your watch while they are talking, is interpreted as a massive, intentional assault on their honor. They react to these micro-slights irrationally and explosively. You cannot reason with them because their rage is fueled by a bottomless well of insecurity.
Yikes. Okay, group 2. The weak person afraid of failing.
This type lacks the courage or the emotional regulation for a direct, honest confrontation. If you anger them, they will smile and nod. But beneath the surface, they let their resentment simmer.
Passive-aggressive.
Extremely. They won't challenge you to a duel. Instead, they will wage a silent campaign of sabotage. They will attack you with 1,000 tiny passive-aggressive jabs over a span of years. They will conveniently forget to relay an important message, or they will plant subtle rumors about you. They are dangerous because their attacks are so small they are hard to prove.
It's death by 1,000 cuts. All right, group 3. The pathologically suspicious. The text actually compares this personality type directly to Joseph Stalin.
This is the paranoid archetype. They truly fundamentally believe that everyone is secretly plotting against them. They see elaborate conspiracies and a casual good morning they're completely immune to trust.
Can you even work with someone like that?
Now, it is possible to temporarily manipulate them by pointing their paranoia toward your mutual enemies, feeding their suspicions to get them to attack a rival. But it is akin to playing with a venomous snake. It is incredibly dangerous because eventually the wheel of their suspicion will inevitably turn and they will fixate their paranoia entirely on you.
Yeah, that sounds like a nightmare. Group 4. The shrewd, unfeeling snake. This one honestly scares me the most.
As it should. This is the cold, calculating sociopath. If you hurt them or humiliate them, they show absolutely no outward sign of anger. They do not yell, they do not storm out of the room. They simply smile, return to their desk, and begin to plan.
They just wait.
They possess infinite patience. They will wait for years, cracking your career until the exact moment you are most vulnerable. Perhaps you are going through a divorce, or your company is facing a lawsuit, and then they will strike with lethal precision. The text is brutal on this point. If you realize you have made an enemy of this type, it is better to completely crush them and remove them from your sphere entirely because they will never, ever forget a slight.
That is terrifying. And finally, group 5. The literal slow mind.
This person is not necessarily malicious, but they are dangerous due to sheer cognitive density. They simply cannot understand nuance, subtext, sarcasm, or complex strategy. They take everything literally.
They just don't get it.
If you attempt to run a sophisticated negotiation or a subtle social play with them, you will exhaust yourself and it will fail because they don't even realize a game is being played on the board. The warning here is simple. If you tell a subtle joke and they take it literally, immediately walk away. Do not try to partner with them. They will only drag you into the mud of their own confusion.
Okay, so once you've successfully identified the psychology of the person across the table, how do you actually influence them? How do you get them to do what you want? This brings us to exploiting desires, fantasies, and finding what the book calls the thumbscrew. Let's talk about fantasies first. The principle is to play to people's fantasies because reality is inherently disappointing.
Reality is mundane. It is full of bills, traffic, aging, and limitations. People possess a desperate, gnawing hunger to escape it.
There is a truly bizarre historical story from the early 1700s that perfectly illustrates how far people will go to believe a fantasy. A young man arrives in London and completely invents a new identity for himself. He claims to be a native of the mysterious, largely unknown island of Formosa, what we now call Taiwan. But he didn't just put on a costume. He went to staggering lengths.
He built a whole world, didn't he?
He invented an entirely fake Formosan language, complete with a distinct alphabet and grammar rules. He invented a fake, elaborate religion involving human sacrifice. He wrote a best-selling book detailing the geography and customs of a place he had literally never been. And he became a massive celebrity in London high society. Deuce and scholars clamored to have him at their dinner parties.
And why did they believe him? There were skeptics, of course, but the vast majority of the elite swallowed the lie whole. They believed it because they wanted it to be true. He offered them a thrilling escape from the dreary, predictable reality of 18th century London into a wild, exotic fantasy.
People want to believe in magic.
Exactly. The psychological takeaway is that if you can promise people a shortcut, sudden, effortless wealth, instant health, or a magical romantic adventure, they will willingly suspend their critical thinking. They will ignore glaring logical holes just to participate in the fantasy you are weaving.
And tapping into that desire is closely related to the darkest concept in the material. Law 33, finding each person's thumbscrew. The text argues that every single person has a thumbscrew, a hidden weakness, and if you find it, you can control them. I have to push back here again. Calling it a thumbscrew evokes images of medieval torture chambers. It sounds sadistic. How do we practically and ethically apply this concept in real life without just becoming a manipulative supervillain trying to inflict pain on our coworkers?
The terminology is intentionally harsh, but the underlying psychological reality is profound and universally applicable. A weakness in this context is rarely a dark, sinister secret, like an embezzled bank account. It is almost always a deeply rooted, unmet emotional need that usually stems from childhood. It is a desperate craving for maternal validation, an intense fear of abandonment, a need to feel intellectually superior, or a desire for unconditional love.
But people hide those traumas. They don't walk into a networking event and say, "Hi, I have a crippling fear of abandonment." How do you find the thumbscrew?
You find it by observing their behavioral armor. You pay close attention to what they chronically overcompensate for. There is a reliable psychological rule. The absolute opposite of a person's natural hidden tendency is often what they display most loudly to the world.
Oh, that makes so much sense.
Right. The person who is the loudest in the room, constantly dominating the conversation and boasting, is almost always the most deeply insecure and desperate for external validation. The person who constantly, aggressively moralizes and criticizes others for being lazy or unethical is often struggling with massive guilt over their own secret vices.
So their overcompensation, their loudest traits, are actually the map directly to their deepest insecurity.
Yes. And once you map that unmet need, the goal is not to torture them with it. The goal is to provide it. If you identify that your notoriously difficult boss is actually acting out of a desperate, unmet childhood need for intellectual validation, you become the one employee who consistently, subtly provides that specific validation. You ask for their wisdom. You feed the void.
And then what happens?
When you become the sole source of the emotional nourishment they crave, they become entirely pliant to your suggestions. They will protect you at all costs because they are addicted to the validation you provide.
That is heavy. It's a profound level of psychological hacking. And these principles scale up. If you can hack an individual's emotional needs, you can hack a crowd. This brings us to the final area, mastering the crowd, taking these psychological tools and applying them to masses of people. Let's look at the psychology of focus and the rule to disdain things you cannot have.
This is fundamentally about where you direct your energy. In the realm of public perception, giving your attention to a minor enemy or a small problem actually injects it with power and validates its existence to the crowd.
The text highlights a massive geopolitical blunder by President John F. Kennedy that illustrates this perfectly. Following the Cuban Revolution, Fidel Castro was a relatively minor irritant. He was leading a small island nation. But JFK became utterly obsessed with him. By focusing the immense power of the American presidency on Castro, and particularly by launching the disastrous Bay of Pigs invasion, JFK accidentally did Castro the greatest favor possible. He legitimized him.
Exactly. The invasion signaled to the entire world and to the Cuban people that this small island leader was a genuine existential threat to the mighty United States empire.
JFK made him a David fighting Goliath. If JFK had simply ignored Castro, treated him with disdain as a minor, irrelevant regional figure, Castro might have lost his revolutionary luster and faded into obscurity.
Ignoring a problem or an enemy is often the most lethal, devastating form of revenge. When you completely ignore someone who is trying to provoke you, you demonstrate that they are entirely insignificant to your reality. It deprives them of the oxygen of attention, it drives them crazy, and they have no strategic countermove.
But when you do want the crowd's attention, you have to bypass their logic. The rule is to create compelling spectacles. Humans are visual, emotional creatures. Words, policies, and logical arguments can be debated and deconstructed. But symbols hit the emotional brain directly.
The historical example of the Fronde, the 1648 French Revolution, is a masterclass in the weaponization of symbols. The rebels were initially a disorganized, struggling group. The king's loyalists mocked them mercilessly. They compared the rebels' rudimentary weapons and tactics to the Frondes, the slingshots used by little boys playing in the streets.
It was meant to be a devastating, emasculating insult.
Yes, but a cardinal who was helping lead the rebellion understood the psychology of the crowd. He realized that a shared symbol is more powerful than a shared ideology. Instead of arguing that they were real soldiers, the rebels embraced the insult. They took the slingshot and adopted it as their official emblem. They wore slingshot pins on their hats, they painted them on their banners.
It's brilliant marketing.
It transformed a humiliating insult into a powerful, uniting, rallying cry. It gave the peasants a visual identity that mobilized the masses far more effectively than any political speech could have. You have to work on the hearts and emotions of the crowd. The text notes how leaders like Mao Zedong didn't use complex academic theory to win over the masses. He used incredibly simple speeches filled with emotional triggers. He promised the two things the crowd always craves: security and sweeping change.
But, and this is a massive critical caveat that trips up so many new leaders, the source warns, advocate the need for change, but never too much at once.
Because while the crowd cheers for the idea of revolution, human beings are fundamentally terrified of actual disruption. We are creatures of habit. We find deep psychological safety in familiar routines and institutions.
We want the benefits of the revolution without the inconvenience of it.
Exactly. If you take power and suddenly upend all the rules, change all the titles, and destroy the familiar traditions, the crowd's anxiety will spike. Their fear of the unknown will override their desire for change, and they will rebel against you. The psychological tightrope of leadership is to preach bold, visionary change while simultaneously maintaining the comforting outward appearance of familiar institutions. You quietly swap out the engine of the car for a massive electric motor, but you leave the old familiar dashboard and steering wheel exactly the same so the driver doesn't panic.
And as you master these dynamics, as you manage the boss, build your aura, navigate conflicts, and sway the crowd, you will inevitably achieve success. But that success triggers the final, most insidious psychological trap. Law 46. Never appear too perfect.
This might be the most important defensive law of all, because it deals with a silent, invisible killer: envy. Envy is a toxic byproduct of the social gravity we've been discussing. When you achieve massive success, you inadvertently alter the dynamic of your peer group. By rising above them, you inherently make the people around you feel like they are failing. Your shining success holds up a brutal mirror to their own mediocrity.
And people hate looking in that mirror. The text points out that they will almost never admit they are jealous. Envy is a shameful emotion. Instead, it mutates. They will start criticizing you for minor, irrelevant things. They will gossip that you must have cheated to get where you are, or most dangerously, they will shower you with excessive praise to your face while secretly, actively plotting to tear you down.
So how do you diffuse the bomb of envy before it explodes?
You have to intentionally mar your own perfection. You must strategically display a flaw. You occasionally admit to a harmless vice, a minor fear, or a relatable struggle. You show them that despite your massive success, you are still a flawed human being.
It gives their bruised egos a handhold. It allows them to say, well, she might be the CEO and she might be brilliant, but at least I am a better public speaker than she is, or at least I'm not afraid of flying like she is. It relieves the psychological pressure.
It is the ultimate flex of power. You are so secure in your dominance that you can afford to curate your own weaknesses just to make the peasants feel better. Well, we have covered a massive, scooping terrain today in this deep dive. We've looked at the treacherous hierarchy of the workplace, the theatrical power of a curated facade, the kinetic movements of conflict, and the deep, often dark psychological vulnerabilities we all carry.
It's a lot to process.
It really is. When you pull it all together, power really comes down to mastering perception, maintaining absolute emotional control of yourself, perfecting your timing, and deeply, unflinchingly understanding the flaws in human nature.
And as we stated at the very beginning, The acquisition of knowledge is the ultimate goal here. You may choose, and frankly, for the sake of your soul, I hope you do choose, to never employ a thumbscrew or build a deceptive smokescreen or execute a vulture strategy. But recognizing the exact moment when these psychological techniques are being deployed against you is the ultimate shield. You begin to see the code of the matrix. You realize when a colleague is trying to isolate you to build a fortress, or when a boss is playing to your fantasies to exploit your labor.
Absolutely. The awareness is the armor. But I want to leave you, the listener, with a final thought to chew on. Something that isn't explicitly laid out in the 48 laws we just unpacked. I want you to imagine an office or an entire society where every single person has read this book. Everyone is hyper-aware. Everyone is trying to play the perfect courtier. Everyone is hiding their true intentions behind a friendly smokescreen. Everyone is trying to be formless, fluid water.
It would be a suffocating room full of mirrors, endlessly reflecting other mirrors.
Exactly. If everyone is playing the manipulative game so rigidly, calculating every syllable and guarding every emotion, who actually holds the power in that room? Perhaps, in an environment saturated with strategy, the true master is the one who has the courage to step completely outside the game. The one who makes genuine authenticity messy, unfiltered, unapologetic, and honest. The ultimate, unpredictable wildcard. Because in a world utterly obsessed with manufacturing perfect illusions, the raw truth might be the only weapon nobody's prepared to defend against.
That completely inverts the paradigm. It changes the gravity completely.
It really does. Thank you for joining us on this custom deep dive. We hope you feel equipped, shielded, and a little more aware of the invisible forces pulling at the room. Keep your eyes open, keep analyzing the dynamics around you, and we'll catch you next.